You guys, today I'm talking to my really good friend, Julie Matthews, and I'm not talking to her because she's a friend, but because she's an incredible, I have a lot of respect for the work that she's doing. Julie, oh, hold on a second. That's what happens. All right, let me mute this lovely video. Okay, now we're good. So the how our paths crossed and kind of deepened even more is the fact that I had problems with oxalates. A couple of years ago, I self-diagnosed with oxalates, and Julie helped me tremendously to really understand this condition. Where is it coming from? What's going on? And so I invited her to talk about it because I know so many of you had really great success when we had a situation, for example, of somebody saying, I've had this chronic pain, I've got carpal tunnel here, and my doctor wants to put me into surgery, and or we had women with vulvodynia, or they were not properly diagnosed, but they were saying, whenever I urinate, I have this tremendous pain. I just don't have sex with my husband anymore. And so that was like, and then we'll say, well, why don't you look into vulvodynia? And then so there was this real life-changing symptoms, life-changing diagnosis, right, that they finally got from a doctor based on the input of the community. And so what I've realized is that oxalates, I think, is going to be like the next big thing that's coming up, right? Julie is nodding here, where we don't really talk much about it yet, but our digestion is really getting so messed up, and Julie's going to be talking about that. The more and more of us are experiencing oxalate problems. So before we dive into the full interview, I just want to know so that you can connect with us right from the beginning to figure out whether this talk is for you or not. Julie, what I would love for you to do is, can we talk about the symptoms of oxalates issues so that people know right away, is this talk for me or not? Otherwise, they're going to drop off, right, if we talk about it too late. So let's just dive into that straight away.
Absolutely. So with oxalates, one of the primary things we often hear about is pain. And the pain can be from even a past injury, because oxalates can go to a site of injury. If someone says, oh, well, I've got pain, but I've had it for 20 years because I had a tennis injury, that still doesn't mean it's not, oxalates aren't still irritating. And we can talk about your story if you want later. But so it could be based on some inflammation or injury in the past, or it could be some new type of pain. It can be systemic, it can be gut pain, or it can be localized pain. So that's a really big one, but also fatigue and energy issues. And this one gets a little tricky because oxalates can interfere with the mitochondria. They can affect any cell in your body, which means they can affect any organ system. So that's where it gets a little challenging. But if you have a lot of fatigue and or pain, if you're little things like your eyes feel like they've got sand in them, or when you go to the bathroom, there seems like there's like sand in there, or if you urinate and it seems like cloudy or crystally.
I just want to say about the stool, what you mentioned. When I was at the height of having the sensitivity to oxalates, ironically, while I was writing a cookbook, it was literally, you could see this, it looked as if I ate a pound of sand. That's how it looked. And it was yellowish in color instead of being brown, right? So you can see like the bile wasn't doing its work at an optimal. And another thing is that the stool can look a little bit like round bowls, isn't it? Right? It can look just lumpy, but just like in round balls, literally. Because that's one of the symptoms. Let's talk a little bit more so about vulvodynia, because that's something that a lot of women don't even know what that is, but I do experience that.
Absolutely. And this is something where there are not a lot of good solutions very often. Vulvodynia is that sharp and really uncomfortable pain that you can get in your vulva area. And it can be, like you said, you can experience when you're walking or having sex or just on a day-to-day basis. And there aren't really that many great solutions for it right now. But the Vulvar Pain Foundation discovered a number of years ago that oxalates was really causing a problem. And that seemed to be the cause for some of those women. So that is a really interesting symptom that if someone has it, it's kind of one of the first things I think about, because if it can be addressed by something like diet, that's such an easy,
yeah. So if you find that this is somebody in your life who is experiencing this, please go ahead and tag them and below this video, and you're watching this on Facebook Live. And then we also would love to get your live questions. So whatever questions you have for Julie as they're coming in. So if you think like this is you, then continue on with us. But before we do that, I want to introduce Julie to everyone. So I came across your work at first because somebody posted on one of the social media about the incredible work you do with autism. And as much as I don't work with people with autism or children with autism, I was just because it was becoming such a problem, right? It has become such a problem. I thought I've got to know a little bit more about it. So I checked out your stuff and I thought, wow, this woman really knows her stuff. So that's why I said at the beginning of this interview is that I'm talking to you not just because you're my friend, that helps, but if you were my friend and you were not really good at what you're doing, I won't be talking to you in public. So broadcasting it to so many thousands of people. So can you tell us a little bit more? I mean, so that's the first thing, that autism, I was blown away with the depth of your knowledge and the results that you're having with parents with autistic children. And so, but then when I self-diagnosed with the whole oxalate issue and I reached out to the community, and you were one of the first people to raise your hand, you said, let me tell you more about oxalates, get educated more. And you gave me access to your practitioner training. And that was so powerful because I realized like, wow, you are really like, you spend your life just researching and writing that stuff. And we're going to talk about the practitioner training. So for those of you who are here who are practitioners, are you thinking about trying to figure out this whole thing with your diet, of whether it's for autism, whether it's about dealing with oxalates and dealing with phenols and dealing with histamine. And Julie is really the go-to person who teaches very in-depth about the different conditions. So that's my little introduction of you. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and like, why did you start this work in the first place?
Absolutely. So I've been doing this work with families with autism for 15 years. The way I got into it just sort of happens to be the universe aligned, and it just sort of came together. I met a man when I was in nutrition school. I was studying ADHD. He had 2 children recovered from autism. That was the beginning of this journey. I never looked back. We spent 3 hours talking about autism and the underlying biochemistry and everything that you could do about it. And I realized nobody knows about this. This was way back. I mean, so 15 years ago was before you ever really heard of autism and before you really even heard of a gluten-free diet. So this was a long time ago. And so when I realized there's something you can do, these children are suffering, nobody knows about it, and it's based in science, this is my job. So that's what I've been doing. I'm very passionate about it. As you said, I research everything I can find. And I think part of it stemmed from, way back then, and even today, people have a big misconception about autism. They think you were sort of born with it, and that's just the way it's going to always be, that there's nothing you can do about it. And so I would get a lot of people that would say, oh, and including doctors, a lot of doctors, oh, there's no science to this diet for autism stuff. And I found hundreds of studies that related to what's the underlying biochemistry look like? How do these diets help? What do we know about it? And including a fascinating study on oxalates we'll talk about. So I realized, okay, I have to get this out there, and it needs to be in a way that's very scientifically sound if we're actually going to reach the people that we need to reach. So that's kind of how I got involved in all of this.
And so you moved sort of beyond working with children with autism. And by the way, for those of you who are joining us a little bit late, there is a gift from Julie, which is right above this video, that talks about the free gift. You see the URL there. And one of the books is a really solid book that Julie wrote. It's a free ebook about diet and changes that are needed for children with autism. So it's fascinating. Every time I see it in an integrative medical conference, I see like this poster of these 20 doctors, and here is Julie Matthews teaching these doctors, which is pretty phenomenal. And so that stuff really works. And so I really want to encourage you. For my audience tends to be a little bit older, like the 45 to 65-year-old women. If you do have autistic children, give it a go. If you know somebody who's got children with autism, which is such a common issue today, almost everyone in a neighborhood, we go to a restaurant, we go out to a shopping mall, there's at least one person you're going to come across who you can see is on a spectrum. These things are incredibly manageable, and the results are spectacular. So let's talk about, we promised oxalates, Julie. So let's dive into this whole oxalate charade. What is going on? Why are we suddenly having all these problems and sensitivities to oxalates? what is happening in our bodies that suddenly they're creating these really nasty symptoms.
Yes, absolutely. So let me just make a quick little connection for people that aren't involved in autism and that's not your primary thing. You might just enjoy the ebook because it's, you know, it's interesting. But also what I discovered when I work with families is that you know, the child might have autism, but the dad has an autoimmune disorder or the mom has a digestive disorder. And the things that were helping the child were also helping the parents. And then I started thinking, of course, they have the same underlying biochemistry. It's just manifesting differently. And then I looked at all the underlying biochemistry you know about autism, and I realized this is the same underlying biochemistry, oxidative stress, inflammation, digestive issues, microbiome issues that we see across all chronic disease. And I realized, autism is just a model for chronic disease, and we can use this to help other people. So if you work with people with other conditions, or you have other conditions, or some of the things we talked about, this will be very helpful as well. So why all this oxalate stuff? Well, what's really exciting is it's brand new science. Now, we've known about oxalates for decades, but only in the space of kidney stones. And in fact, they did a study on autism that I think is interesting because it almost didn't get published, because the researchers said, well, you can't have an issue with oxalates if you don't have kidney issues. And they screened every child and adult out and made sure they did not have kidney issues. And yet they still had very high levels of oxalate. So at the time, the researchers thought, well, this can't be scientifically sound because it goes against our knowledge. But they realized, well, it is scientifically sound, so maybe there's some new knowledge out there. And so what we're discovering now is that it's a much wider problem than just kidney stones. And so if you look at the research, you see that as I said, it can get into the mitochondria, and it can start to affect the thyroid and any kind of every organ that obviously needs energy, which is all of them. So why are we seeing more of this today? I mean, maybe now it's that we understand that it can affect more things, but also we have a lot of challenges in our modern world that we didn't have as much back then. And so what happens is, you can get oxalate issues from two ways. And one of those is when you eat a lot of foods high in oxalate. Now, for an average healthy person, if you eat moderate levels, probably not going to really affect you. But if you have gut issues, so if you've got not enough good bacteria, because the good bacteria is going to break it down, if you don't have enough minerals to bind to that oxalate, if you've got fat malabsorption issues, so now it's binding to the wrong things, if you've got leaky gut, you've now got this free oxalate, and now it can get inside into the bloodstream because of the leaky gut. So we have the perfect storm of things of people not having enough good bacteria, having an inflamed and leaky gut, and eating too many oxalate foods because they're healthy. We now see a lot of oxalate issues that we may not have seen before.
Perfect. Can we talk about which are the foods that are high in oxalates? And I know we have our listeners that are going to be like,
I know. This is the part. So spinach is really high. So I'll give you an example. So a low oxalate diet, not everybody needs low, but if you needed one, it's about 40 to 60 milligrams. So let's say 50, just for a number. Spinach has 500 in a single serving. And so, you can see how it adds up quickly. Almond flour has 450 milligrams in a quarter of a cup. So nut butters, nut flours of any kind, particularly some are worse than others, but they're all high. Beef,
chocolate.
Yes, chocolate.
Carob.
Yes, other sweets as well, other things like, other greens, like not only spinach, but even Swiss chard is quite high. Kale, we can find some low versions. So I think what happens sometimes is people go, these are all the foods I love. And a lot of the healthy, popular sort of health foods like chia seeds are outrageously high. So one of the things is that oxalates in nature bind to minerals. So you think of, oh, well, spinach is really high in calcium and almonds are really high in calcium, so I should eat lots of them. The challenge is that because they're bound to oxalate, you can't actually access that calcium. So while we think these are, so a lot of people are eating these foods because they think they're really healthy because of that nutrient profile. They're just not realizing they're not able to access that.
Yeah. And also one thing I don't want to do here is demonize oxalates, right? There are online groups, right, that help people navigate their way through oxalates. And I feel like they demonize all oxalate high foods, and the whole policy is you're going to avoid them for life in order to heal. And I completely disagree with that, because number one, you become so obsessed with what you're eating. you're not using food as a source of enjoyment and nourishment, but you're just fearing food. And that's a terrible place to be functioning from, living from. But also, I just don't think that we should be living such restrictive diets, period.
I totally agree. And one of the things I teach in my training all the time is that the goal is to eliminate what you need to and nothing more, because there's variety, there are nutrients, there's other benefits. And how do we heal the underlying biochemistry and problems that are causing the issue? So there are some people that maybe genetically or for whatever reason, they need to avoid oxalate. But for other people, maybe they need to fix and heal the underlying problem, and then they can go back to eating them. So
absolutely, and I really want to. One of the empowering things I want to say today is that, it was life-changing for me just to work with a functional doctor and clear all the gut dysbiosis that I had. We did the GI map test, right? With many of you know, I've been talking about in the past. GI map is really great. Shows you a lot of stuff that a lot of other tests don't. And we cleared it out. We treated my gut as if I had SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And I have to tell you, like within 2 months, I went to this place and there was nothing else to eat. And there was only a quinoa bowl with like almonds. And I'm thinking, oh my God, if I eat this, I'm going to be in so much pain again. And all my pain was going into my hips. For many of you who follow me for a while, I had a double hip replacement done 2 months ago. And so hips has always been my weak point. And so the oxalates like to deposit themselves, like what Julie said initially, where there was, not often, not always, but a lot of times where there was damage from before, where there was an injury from before. And I've had it, I had it since birth. So that was, and I was like, I remember eating that bowl thinking, I am going to be in so much pain. I'm going to be having a hard time even to get back to my car. And long and behold, 30 minutes later, nothing. And then 2 hours later, nothing. And then I realized it cleared. It totally cleared. Wow. Chocolate is still sensitivity, I will tell you. Anything more than 2 squares will trigger pain, come back again. But then again, I have the genetic mutation for being a really lousy oxalate, metabolizer. So that explains things. So let's talk a little bit more for those people who are, so if somebody has an oxalate problem, Julie, right? Mm-hmm. Diagnosed or they suspect they have it based on our conversation here today, what can they do?
Well, you can do a couple things. You can do research and kind of figure out if you really think you have it. There are lab tests that you can do. There's an organic acid test that you can do that can give you some idea. Although I have to say that I have seen that come up in the normal range when it has been a problem for people. So if it comes up high, that's probably telling you something valuable. If it comes up in range and you still suspect something, you still might want to dig further that way. Some people, the one thing about this diet that's a little different than other diets is that sometimes you say, oh, do I have a gluten issue? Take gluten out. Do you feel better? With oxalates, if you take them out, you sometimes feel worse before you feel better because you have to remove them very slowly. If you remove them quickly, the body starts dumping and then you can feel more symptoms. So a food trial is fine. Sometimes you'll feel better, but because the food trial you want to do very, very, very slowly, it's a little different than you might expect otherwise. So that makes that portion a little bit tricky. What else can they do? Start to look at food lists of what they're eating, and then maybe just pick one food at a time and slowly look at what it would look like to lower it, switch it out with another food. But also the other thing that's really important, and probably what I would do or recommend to people, is to definitely do some research, because there's other reasons people have oxalate issues. I told you there were 2 reasons. The first is if you eat a high oxalate diet in the presence of all those gut issues. But the other way is that you can actually produce oxalate inside the cell. And then it's right there causing problems, and that can be due to different deficiencies. Like one of them is B6 deficiency. So I do think it's helpful if you really suspect it to do a little bit of research, because it's nice to do a low oxalate diet combined with a supplement approach that can support the other areas that you might need.
Yeah. And tell our listeners, where can they order the OAT tests?
Yeah.
Organic acid tests.
Yeah, the one that I know of that has an oxalic acid marker is Great Plains Laboratory. Theirs is the only one I currently know of that does that. Now, you could go to your standard doctor and you can have them look at the urine under a microscope and they can determine if there's oxalates in the urine that way. So that's another way. If you don't have a functional doctor and don't necessarily have access to these, you can still get some good data.
Okay. Cool. And there is a website to order the Great Plains, because not from their website, right? There is another website you remember you pointed me to. What was the website again?
Oh gosh, there's a variety of sites. So if you normally have to be a practitioner, you have to be a doctor, but there are some consumer sites for where you can order things. So Lab Test Plus is one of those companies, and there's a variety of other labs that way too. So
yeah, Lab Plus Test, right?
Lab Tests Plus.
Lab Test Plus, there you go, .com, right? That's the one that I got mine from as well. So tell us a little bit more about the oxalate and an autism connection.
Yeah, absolutely. So they did a study a few years ago, and as I mentioned, they screened out people that had kidney issues, even people that were on special diets, all these different things, and they found out that there were 2.5 to 3-fold higher levels of oxalate. Now, that doesn't really mean too much for you and I, but when the oxalate researchers looked at this, they were shocked and really wondered, they wondered how these children were really functioning, because the levels were so high, they thought they should be incredibly sick. So, and some of them actually are. They just don't realize that this might be part of the issue. And then when you look at it and you look at, okay, mitochondria, it can damage mitochondria, it can create oxidative stress. It happens in the presence of microbiome issues and leaky gut issues. I mean, these are all things we see in autism. So it paints a very consistent picture with what we know about the science. And so that was a really groundbreaking study. I think it was the first of its kind that looked at oxalates outside of kidney stuff.
Right. Yeah. And that's something that was such a big thing. I remember for me listening to this, hearing somebody say to me, look into oxalates. And I thought, I don't have kidney stones. What are you talking about? Right. So, hey, you guys, so what questions do you have for Julie? Who here thinks that you might be having an oxalate issue? And this is a big aha moment for you. I'm going to log in to our Facebook page and take a look at the questions, what's coming in. I'm curious, what questions do you have about that? Do you know people who've been having issues with the symptoms we're talking about? So if you're joining in late, we're talking about vulvodynia, we're talking about chronic also yeast infections, right, Julie? That's another thing that's coming up a lot with people with oxalate problems. Chronic pain, the one like a real sharp pain. It's not just like pain. It's just somewhere here. It's a sharp pain. It's these crystals really are literally cutting through the tissue, and that's what makes it so incredibly uncomfortable. And then just systemic inflammation, systemic fatigue that Julie was talking about. Fatigue is a tricky one because it can happen due to so many different reasons, right?
Exactly.
So that's a tricky one. But like things like vulvodynia, I found like the very sharp chronic pain, especially in places of former injury, those are very, very revealing symptoms. Mm-hmm. So let's see, there are some questions coming out. Wendy is saying, oh my God, this is me. Wendy, I'm wondering which is the symptom that is coming up for you. Katrina Fogler is asking, does dairy have oxalates, Julie?
Dairy's, I don't think dairy is particularly high oxalate. It's funny that I say that because none of my clients do dairy. So it's not a food I ever think to introduce as a low oxalate food. If I think about it, I don't think it's particularly high, but I would honestly have to look it up. I could tell you the actual number of values for like hundreds of foods, but not dairy since I never use it. So.
Working with it. So I will tell you, I will help out here. Dairy is actually low in oxalates, but it is generally not something that I think most of us practitioners recommend for women due to, the intolerance to dairy is so high that it's just not worth it. Anything from constipation to having actually pain with dairy, chronic depression. The list just goes on with dairy. So to me, gluten and dairy are the two biggest foods that we remove when we work on the elimination diet. And if you discover you can have dairy, then only from really responsible sources and very occasionally sort of a treat rather than a staple food. So, it's interesting. Sally Baker saying, my doctor helped me with this and I use calcium calcase. Have you heard of that?
No. not calcium citrate.
I think she means calcium citrate, right? Citrate, yeah, because that's I think it's a misspelling there. Yeah, that's one of the tools, right, to use with oxalates.
Yeah, so oxalates, you can bind the oxalate. If you can bind the oxalate in the gut, then it'll just wash out in the stool and it won't absorb. Theoretically, I mean, if your gut is leaky, it still may absorb anyway, but it does help to reduce the amount of oxalate that gets absorbed from meals typically. What I find though is, and one of the things that people often say to me is, oh, well, if this is due to the microbiome or this is due to, these kinds of things, I'll just fix the microbiome or take calcium. And the thing is that if it works, great. And if this worked for this person, that's wonderful. But what I find is that sometimes, very often, you need to relieve the burden from the body and work on healing the underlying things and then assess whether, what level you need to be at. Because sometimes just trying to Band-Aid the underlying causes without taking out the thing that's causing the drain on them makes it challenging to get to that point.
Absolutely. And when you're in so much pain, and you're so highly symptomatic, whatever the symptoms might be, it's just really hard for the body to, the body is so inflamed that even the response to the gut healing protocol might be compromised, right? So tell us a little bit more about, for those of us who are practitioners, but from what I gather from what you talk about, the education program you put together is not just really for practitioners, but it's also for people who really want to understand what is going on with their health in the family, right? You have some like regular moms and women doing the program as well, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a training program I created for practitioners. Like I said, it's got hundreds of scientific references. And it's very based in what you can do based on my clinical experience and also what the science is saying. And so for a long time, I only allowed practitioners to take it, but moms kept saying, I want to take it. And I'm telling you, I have some savvy moms that are like PhDs in biochemistry and stuff. And I thought, well, why can't a mom take it? Whether she's a PhD in biochemistry or a mom, if she wants to understand this, why not? And I think, you know what, to see a biomedical doctor in autism can cost $1,000 a visit. It can be expensive. So I can understand that a mom might want to figure this part as much as she can. And also the doctors don't always understand this part. So she can get really knowledgeable, or the individual can get really knowledgeable. And then they can search out the experts they think they need based on doing a bunch of work and research themselves. So one of our biggest groups originally was when I opened it up to moms. Now it's not just moms. We have individuals that take the training too. And I offer a quite, I think, generous scholarship for individuals that are not practitioners so that they can get this information, since they're just going to be using it for themselves in a more cost-effective way. So if you are a parent or an individual interested, just email us because we have a special, it's like 40% off. So it's really quite helpful. So yeah, you can be an individual and take the training, or you can be a practitioner. If you're a practitioner, you get, well, everyone gets access to all the handouts and all the food lists and all that. But as a practitioner, obviously, you can use all of those things in your practice. So it just makes it really easy to catch up to speed.
So what exactly are you teaching in that program?
So I teach about all different types of special diets. And it's similar to what we're talking about here, but I don't only teach about low oxalate. I teach about low phenol, low salicylate, low amine, low histamine, low glutamate, low FODMAPs. Some of the chemicals and compounds that a lot of people don't necessarily know about, but that I find really have quite a significant impact on someone's biochemistry and their healing. So for example, in this conversation of oxalates, and I don't want to overwhelm anybody because I'm always about like providing hope and actionable steps. But to give you an example, if you don't have enough sulfate, if your sulfation isn't working, if you don't have enough sulfate, oxalate can get inside the cell and affect the mitochondria. Well, we know that if you don't have good sulfation, you also might have issues with histamines or amines or salicylates, other compounds. So that's the other thing we're doing, is we're pulling together multiple dietary strategies. So I go through every diet, what the underlying biochemistry is, what conditions have that similar underlying biochemistry. So when I think of mitochondrial issues, and I'm thinking of MS or fibromyalgia or something that might have a mitochondrial thing related, I'm going to look at certain diets. So I'm looking at it from a perspective of what are all the different diets? How do you implement them across the spectrum of various health conditions? Right.
And so it sounds like the program is really designed for people who, if it's a practitioner, is somebody who really wants to help their patients, their clients who are just not getting better, right? It's like one of those that even a functional practitioner sometimes will say like, we've tried everything. We did the elimination diet, we put her on the whole supplement protocol, we did hormones, right? We did injections and nothing is working, right? And so, and the truth is that a lot of the stuff that you're teaching is so groundbreaking that even a lot of the functional practitioners are still there catching up on it. That's why you were such a hot speaker in a lot of those functional conferences, right? So that sounds like it's really to get somebody to get their practice to the next level, to work with people who are willing to, who need further help and who are not being helped currently. And that's a really great opportunity to also kind of, I feel like when you carve out a niche for yourself, it really helps so much, right? Like the way I had the niche when I don't practice anymore, but like I had my niche with thyroid and hormones, right? And so I was getting so many clients, I had a wait list because of just being very niched.
Yeah.
Am I right to say all of that?
Absolutely. And some people, their niche is just bio-individual nutrition and understanding all these concepts and applying them across conditions, because you're right. There are very few practitioners. So I've been working with the low oxalate diet for 10 years, but most people haven't really even heard of it. And if they have, they don't necessarily, it's sort of, they don't necessarily know exactly what to do about that. So absolutely looking at all that. And if you think about it, it's like a lot of times I find, and one of the reasons I think I started this is because I see a lot of dogmatic thinking in nutrition, and it really frustrates me. There's always the popular diet of the year that everybody's doing and that you have to do, if you're going to heal. And the truth is, it's just not the way that it works. So there are a lot of practitioners that they're doing great stuff. Maybe they have their go-to diet, but maybe that's not working for a subset of people. And so looking at what that might be. So you mentioned yeast. So I've had clients that have been on a specific carbohydrate diet or like some sort of a paleo diet, not only like grain-free and starch-free, but low sugar, low fruit for years, and they cannot get rid of their yeast. And then they find out, oh, I have an oxalate issue. They might even go back to eating some rice or some other things, but they address they're still going to be low, but when they address the oxalates, now it finally gets resolved. And that's because oxalates impair biotin-dependent enzymes, and biotin is really important for yeast overgrowth. So they were going down this one path with a great diet, but it wasn't meeting their biochemistry needs. So yeah, for practitioners that get the non-responders, the difficult patients, the people that really want to feel like I've got all the tools that I need to figure out which direction I'm going to want to take it to the next level. That's what.
Totally. And there's so many health practitioners there's so many health practitioners, health coaches joining the market. It's becoming more and more competitive. This is really an opportunity to differentiate yourself, getting knowledge of something that most people have no freaking clue how to deal with people who are having that kind of stuff. And this, on the same note, when it sounds to me like you don't have to be a practitioner. This could also be for somebody who just isn't getting any better and wants to give it a shot. And one of the cool things about your program is not just going through, you're not only just talking about the different issues and the foods in them, but exactly what are the healing protocols that need to be applied, right, to the different conditions. And so you can basically heal yourself.
Exactly. We look at not only what foods to eat and avoid and how to implement those special diets, but how do we not have to be on that special diet forever? So that's why understanding the underlying biochemistry, what nutrients might be deficient, what do we want to boost up, what other environmental factors. So with phenols and salicylates for kids that are really aggressive, one of my clients said, oh my gosh, my child has been really terrible the last 3 weeks and I'm really, feeling upset for them. Turns out their Christmas tree was high in these aromatic oils and was creating all their behavior issues. So what do we look at? Not only the foods they eat, but other environmental lifestyle factors. And how do we get to the healing at the bottom so that we can have a more robust diet?
So just a question about the Christmas tree. This is synthetic fragrances, or was it natural?
The natural pine scent.
Oh, wow.
That is an aromatic oil, and those are phenolic based. So for some people, essential oils or things like that. But yeah, it was a natural Christmas tree with no flame retardant or anything on it.
Right. Wow. That's
interesting. Outside, and it went away like the next day.
Yeah. It's, anybody who's got a sluggish liver too, right? It's going to be responding to any form of smells, whether good or bad, natural or not, in a much more overwhelmed fashion as compared to somebody who is completely able to clear it quickly. Yeah. So let's see what questions, who here, so we have a number of people coming on saying, like Sheila is saying exactly that's where I am, nothing is working. So Sheila, I think that will be good for you to dive in. So yeah, Julie, what are we asking people to do is to log in into, so the link is above this video, right? Click on that, it's a free gift from Julie, really solid, awesome. There's either the autism book or there is the 10 pivotal questions that practitioners should be asking, right? If you're a practitioner.
Everybody gets both of them, because I think even the practitioner one about the 10 pivotal questions to ask are things that individuals can start thinking about and researching or asking their doctor about. So it's a really a great thing to get their mind going around how all these different substances might affect people. So everybody will get both of them, and then they can sort of see from there what might be the most helpful information for them.
Okay, and that leads them to like you do have some emails that follow up, like if they do want to join the program, right?
Absolutely, I'm going to be sending them like just interesting case studies and things to kind of get them, again, more knowledgeable. And then also some information. In fact, we have a program starting in the next couple weeks. So if someone decides they really want to get involved, I'll send out an email kind of more quickly than I might normally about letting people know about the program in case they want to jump into this next one that we have starting.
Right. Let's see what questions are we getting on oxalates. Wendy is saying, oh my God, this is me. So there's also an interesting comment that says, I was diagnosed with SIBO, antibiotic helped by symptoms above, the ones that I listed above, have returned. What would you say to that, Julie?
They had symptoms, they took antibiotics, they got better, but then the symptoms returned.
Yeah, so she was diagnosed with SIBO. She took SIBO antibiotics to get rid of SIBO. Her high oxalate symptoms returned. Okay,
so I mean, it's hard for me to know exactly, but I would be considering two things. One is, did the bacteria just revert back to their old way, and that the antibiotic or whatever they didn't really get rid of that issue, and has that just come back now, and that's part of the thing affecting this whole cascade.
Yeah.
For some people, there is when you take an antibiotic, you do also wipe out some of the good guys. So could it be that the Oxalobacter formigenes was already a bit compromised, now it's more compromised, or it's a little hard to say exactly what that might be. Also wonder, I'm trying to think, what else could that be?
While you're thinking, I just want to share my thing with oxalates is that they actually came upon after I was put an antibiotic to get rid of a parasite. And oh my God, I mean, I had a huge die-off from that antibiotic, obviously that killed it, and it took care of the parasite. The parasite was causing a lot of yeast infections. Just couldn't, literally was a teaspoon of an orange juice 2 sips of white wine will bring on like a tsunami of symptoms of yeast infection. So that was a crazy thing I was going through. So my doctor, even though functional, says, look, we need to knock out this parasite, right? So we did, herbal stuff didn't help. I went on antibiotic, and it was 2 months after the antibiotic that I started having severe problems with oxalates. So they definitely, when I looked up later, that antibiotic was a broad spectrum, and it just wiped out too many good guys. And obviously that's what caused probably the SIBO to come upon, or just kill the bacteria. You were talking about, remind me, what's the name of that bacterium that breaks down oxalates?
Oxalobacter formigenes.
There you go. And, and I actually did a specific study on that. And I did actually a test on myself, and I had actually an excess of this bacteria. So I think that led me to believe that, there is more and other bacteria that we might not even know about that is breaking down oxalates, not just that. Yes. Alone that's causing it. And so, just by rebalancing the gut. So I definitely eliminated oxalates, which was tough to do. And, while doing my cookbook, so some of you say like, oh, it's so hard. Let me tell you, when I was doing my cookbook, my brownies and all the chocolate smoothies and whatever, I will taste it just to see what it tastes like. And I had to spit it out. Because by swallowing it, I will be in such severe pain for the next 3 to 4 days. It just wasn't worth it. Like even a teaspoon or a bite of a brownie. It was a crazy time.
Wow.
It was probably one of the worst things that I've ever, I mean, it feels like having 2 hips replaced was a walk in a park compared to deal with this oxalate issue because of the chronic pain, the chronic fatigue, the constipation it brought upon, and the mystery, the frustration of what is going on with me.
Yes.
That was, I think, the hardest thing. And so that's why I love what you do, is because I think you debunk a lot of the mysteries, or I should say, you help to demystify a lot of the symptoms that people are suffering with just educating on it and on the different diets. And I think today also, the way healthcare works is different from before. Like, we've got to take charge of that. Before, it was the kind of thing where you walk into the doctor's office, even a functional one, you'll be like, well, I expect her to tell me everything, right? Like A to Z, run all the tests, tell me exactly what's wrong with me. And oftentimes that works, but with people with more complicated cases, sometimes it just doesn't. I mean, I went to see probably 4 practitioners who are really skilled. I highly respect them, who didn't help me, who couldn't help me, right? And, and they were giving me like this, do this, do this, do this. And I did all of that. It didn't really help, so it's really taking things into your own hands. And until I met somebody and he said to me, look at the whole picture. Don't just focus on this and just taking this food out and just micromanaging the whole thing. Just look at your whole gut issue. And when I went to see, and that's why I went to see a practitioner who was super expensive and incredibly hard to get to. In fact, she doesn't even take any more patients at this point. She's got a 3-year wait list. But that really just helped to clear everything out. And that changed my life. It really did.
Wow.
So some final parts for us, Julie. What would you like to share? And let me go over and see if there's any questions while you are.
Sure. Let me think if I have any notes here that I wanted to.
Katrina is asking, how do you figure out this is your issue? I mean, we already talked about it. So you want to definitely, what would you say, Julie? I will let you answer that. How do you figure out you have this issue?
Yeah, I mean, usually what I'm doing, and when if I have a practitioner and someone says, how do I figure out what diet someone needs? I'm looking at a number of things. I'm looking at, what are their symptoms? Are they consistent with symptoms that we typically see in this? What do they have any health conditions that we would see consistent? Have we seen a reaction to these foods before? Now that's a tricky one because a lot of times you don't see a reaction because it's in the diet so much. You might not know till you remove it and that kind of thing. But I'm usually just looking at a combination and what their diet looks like. I would look at, do they know, like for people that have pyroluria and they know they have a B6 deficiency, that would just be a clue of looking further. So I would be looking at the combination of things that we know about oxalates, and do they have 2 or 3 of those coming together, or a multiple cluster of symptoms? Like you said, if someone has fatigue, you can't determine what diet they need from that one thing. But if you know they have fatigue and pain and these other things, now you have a much better sense that you're probably on the right track.
Yeah, totally. There's an interesting comment here from Maggie who says food plays a great role in oxalate levels. There's a huge list of oxalates which has helped me keep my pain level and oxalate production down very low. So yeah, that is very true. And I think if you can hold on to that kind of diet, I mean, great. I personally feel like we should really strive for resolving the underlying cause of why we're not breaking down oxalates and not be sticking to a low oxalate diet, because quite frankly, you just can't live like that, especially if you travel, if you want to go out, it's there in everything. And including if you go to a healthy restaurant, it's going to be there. So I would really encourage everyone to look at the underlying causes. And actually the interesting thing is that when we get rid of the underlying causes, a lot of other symptoms start going away, not only related to oxalates, but a lot of other stuff, including your memory, quality of your sleep.
Absolutely.
Hormones change because if you're a B6 deficient, your progesterone tanks as well, right? So there's just a lot of rebalancing happens. Avoidance is a great starting point. It's not a solution. It's not a long-term solution. The same way elimination diet is not a long-term solution for your health. It's just a starting point and the detective tool to a healing journey.
Right. And like you said, when you're in such pain, it's a lot easier to do the diet, right? It's like you might need it, you might benefit, you might be willing to do it because it is much better than the alternative of being in pain. But yeah, and at the same time, start to figure out what you can do, if there's anything you can do to slowly or make your way to a more varied diet. Maybe you'll still need, maybe your threshold will increase. So you can go out to a restaurant, have a little bit more, but you're probably not going to do spinach again.
Right. Right. Like chocolate is still an issue. I'm working on that one. Okay. So Wendy's asking, where can I sign up?
So the web, so if you go to, I'm trying to think of the best way.
The link is above. So Wendy, the link is above this video, and just click on that link. It gives you the free gift. The free gift will give you emails from Julie that will tell you about the program. And if you just want to get the free gift and you don't want to get the emails, just unsubscribe. Don't complain about things. What else?
You know what I'll do? I will make sure that when people get that free gift, that I right away send them the link for the training info if they want it. So if they want to get it in right away, so they'll have that information right at the beginning.
And what is the 10 pivotal questions is for practitioners to ask, right? To really like hone in on the diagnosis. Is that how it works?
Yeah, it's a bunch of questions like, what happens if your patient is doing a whole foods diet and they feel worse? You know, what things might it be? So I not only go into oxalates, but what other things it might be. And if they've got a gut issue, what do you look at? If they've got dysbiosis, what do you look at? If they got this high marker, what might that mean? So it's a bunch of questions, and I go into not only oxalates, but phenols and all these other things.
Yeah, awesome. I am proud to call you my friend.
Oh, thank you.
And you're such a geek.
I know. I have long knee socks that say nerd on them, and I wear them roller skating, and I'm proud to wear them.
Well, that nerdism has definitely helped a lot of people with their practices and with their health. I know a number of moms with autistic children who are your patients. And so do you still take patients?
I do, but very few. And I've been letting all of the practitioners that I've been training, I've been sending people mostly there, because as you know, there's only so much time, and it's very rewarding. If I can help one practitioner, they can help hundreds of people. So that's very rewarding for me.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, everyone, have a wonderful rest of Friday, and wishing you a lovely weekend. Check out Julie's stuff. It's really solid material. I really hope it helps you dig deeper into your own health and see what's going on. And if you're a practitioner, then you know what to do by now. All right, everyone, have a great weekend. Thank you so much, Julie.
Thanks, Magdalena.
Bye.
Bye.